After the Civil War, freedom came on paper. In Louisiana, that meant something very specific. Black men could vote, they could hold office, they could speak publicly about power. And in a town like Opelousas, a small parish seat surrounded by plantations, dirt roads, and bayou land, that shift didn't go unnoticed. Because Opelousas wasn't New Orleans. There were no crowds to disappear into, no anonymity. Everybody knew where you lived, who you worked for, and which side you were on.
In 1867, a man named Emerson Bentley arrived in Opelousas. He had been working as a teacher with the Freedmen's Bureau. Emerson also edited a small newspaper. Nothing flashy, just words, printed and circulated. But the words mattered because Opelousas already had a newspaper war underway. One paper backed the old order. The other, the one that Emerson edited, was something new. It was called the St. Landry Progress, a Republican paper, created to support a different kind of power. Bentley didn't start the paper, but he stepped into it. First working on the press, then becoming one of its English language editors. He wrote about power, about elections, and about the violence already building in Opelousas. Days before the violence, there was a standoff between Black Republicans and white Democrats. The two groups came to an agreement to keep the peace. Bentley broke that agreement by way of print, by calling out what he saw and refusing to stay quiet. In Opelousas, that kind of writing didn't sit quietly. After all, he was a white man teaching Black students in a town that didn't want either. So, to the existing power structure, this wasn't just opinion. It was influence. And people were reading it. It moved from hand to hand, from porch to porch, from conversation to confrontation. Outside the papers, the arguments were no longer staying on the page. White residents, many of them former Confederates, many of them still tied to the land and to the old order, began organizing. Not formally, not on paper, but everyone knew what was happening. Men gathered at night near the courthouse square, along the main road that cut through town. They were talking, watching, waiting. One of those men, a former soldier, now back on his land just outside town, had spent the last 3 years watching everything change. He saw Black men lining up to vote. He saw them speaking in meetings. He saw federal authority backing them. And to him, it didn't feel like change. It felt like something being taken away. By late September, tension had already started to break again. 3 men came for Bentley. They were members of a group known as the Seymour Knights. This was a white supremacist organization, aligned with those trying to take power back. They beat him with a cane inside the school where he was teaching.
They are killing Mr. Bentley!
The children screamed. Emerson didn't die. He was forced out of town for what he wrote, for what he taught, for refusing to stay quiet. What happened to Emerson Bentley was a message. And the word spread fast, not through newspapers, but through people, through fear. And then groups began to form. Armed white men, some local, some from nearby areas, moved through Opelousas and the surrounding roads. Not hiding, not rushing, but moving with purpose. They went toward black neighborhoods, clusters of homes just outside the central town, along dirt paths near fields near tree lines. Places where families lived. Places where people thought they might be able to stay unseen. One man, a freedman, who had voted earlier that year, heard the movement before he saw it. Horses, voices, not loud, but steady. He stepped outside, and that was enough. They came toward him, and he ran, cutting off the main path, moving into brush, into low trees, toward the edge of a bayou line. Behind him, they followed. Not shouting, just tracking. He dropped into water, shallow, muddy, barely moving, and pressed himself down. Breathing through the reeds, not moving. Not even when they passed close enough that he could hear them speaking. They didn't end up finding him, but they found others. In another part of town, closer to the road leading toward Washington, a woman watched from inside her home as a neighbor was pulled from his doorway. There was no trial, no accusations spoken out loud, just force. He tried to resist, but it didn't last long. She didn't scream, didn't move, because by then, everyone understood the rules. Over the next several days, the violence spread, not in one single moment, but in waves. Groups moving through different areas, returning, moving again. Some were killed immediately. Others were taken, held briefly, and then killed. And some simply disappeared. No official count was ever fixed. Some reports said dozens, others said far more. But numbers weren't the point. Control was. By the time it ended, Opelousas had changed again. Not on paper, but in reality. Black political activity stopped. Meetings disappeared. Voting functionally stopped. Those who survived learned quickly. Stay quiet, stay out of sight, stay alive. And the men who carried it out, they went back to their lives, back to their land, their routines. No trials, no convictions, no accountability. What happened in Opelousas in 1868 was not chaos. It wasn't random. It was organized, targeted, and effective. And over time, the story faded, left out of the textbooks, passed over in silence. But it did happen. in a small Louisiana town where everyone knew each other and where for a few days the rules were made clear. This is what suppression looks like.